Okay, and we are thankful today to have as our second guest, Antonio Ingram. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your role with the Legal Defense Fund and your role in this case in Alexander versus South Carolina NAACP.
Thanks for having me. I am a litigator with the Legal Defense Fund. Part of my portfolio of cases includes voting rights, and I have been on this case since its conception, when we filed a complaint against the General Assembly for passing congressional maps that we alleged were both a racial gerrymander and a product of intentional discrimination to dilute the political power of Black voters. And so we have litigated this through trial, and now we're before the U.S. Supreme Court seeking an affirmance of a unanimous three-judge court's ruling at the lower court declaring that Congressional District 1 was unconstitutional, and we're really working to uplift this victory for Black voters and to preserve it so that Black voters in Congressional District 1 in South Carolina can vote in fair maps in future elections.
Now, tell me a little bit about the timeline for the case. You talked about the start of it. So what is the calendar timeline?
So the case, we filed a complaint in spring of 2022, and we went to trial in October of 2022. We received a ruling from the court in January of 2023 and have been briefing appeals before the U.S. Supreme Court since then, and we're going to oral argument on October 11th, 2023.
So what is the impact in a win? What does a win look like? And what does a lose look like? I don't know if you want to put it in win-lose language, but what are those two outcomes look like for South Carolina Black voters?
A win looks like having voters in Congressional District 1 being able to influence their elections with their preferred candidates, which translates into increased federal resources for healthcare, for broadband internet, for medical care such as insulin caps, and it's having elected officials which are responsive to their needs and which can really serve their communities in ways that currently are not occurring because the political leadership understands that when you divide Black communities based on race and when you dilute their political power, you not have to be responsive to their needs and to their petitions for resources and representation.
Well, as a matter of fact, there's a current issue right now with the Charleston County School District. And there are 9 board members on the school district. 5 of them are in one group that is alleged to be connected with Moms for Liberty, and the other 4 are not. And so these 5 have removed a superintendent and have done so in a way that didn't include the other 4 board members. So we're kind of seeing in real time what happens when you don't have that representation. So that will include CD1, but it include many other races as well, many other elections as well, that people don't have voting straight. Isn't that right?
So our litigation is focused on the congressional map in Congressional District 1, though there are efforts that are being led across the state to really create more equity as well in local and state redistricting. Black people need political power at every level of their community. And we are right now in this current case focused on the congressional map, but we also are supporting efforts to help create more fair representation at the local and the state level as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that clarification. And now tell us a little bit about LDF for people who don't know what that is. Who are you all? How long have you been here? And what are the main fights that you're involved in?
We are the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We were founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall, who many of your viewers know was the first Black Supreme Court Justice. The Legal Defense Fund litigated Brown v. Board of Education, ending educational apartheid in our country. And we've been committed to ensuring that Black people have dignity and belonging in this country ever since our inception. And we have various focus areas, including political participation. And so this case is really part of our core. We also litigated the Milligan case last year, which the Supreme Court upheld the Voting Rights Act in Section 2, and the requirement to draw a second congressional district for Black voters in Alabama. And so we've really been in this current season fighting for Black voters across the country. And in this current moment, we're really uplifting Black voters in South Carolina to help ensure they receive their full constitutional protection in the election process.
So tell me what people who do not live in South Carolina, why should they follow this case? Why should they pay attention to this case, and what impacts could it have outside the state of South Carolina if there is a win?
This case is important for our country as a whole. This is about our congressional map, and we have a 3-judge court has already found that the congressional map that was used in the last election was unconstitutional. And having elected officials in our national legislative body being elected under maps that do not comply with the U.S. Constitution undermines our entire democratic process. As a country, we all want to have a Congress that is representative of the people, that is fair in its electoral process. And South Carolina is the current state that is being sort of highlighted, but this is about our democracy, and this is about Black voters having a political voice in South Carolina, but also in every state. This is a case about how we cannot allow elected officials to use Black voters as political pawns to gain power. This is a case about how we need to ensure that the U.S. Constitution applies to all of our citizens and not just certain demographics.
Exactly. When October 11th comes, there'll be a number of supporters and maybe opposers there in Washington, D.C. To convey their message. Now, how is this a part of upholding democracy, having all those voices out there?
Yeah, having dialogues about different opinions regarding what is true and what is not true, I think is very important. And we've earlier had a dialogue in this case where 3 judges determined that it was true that Black voters were harmed by congressional maps in South Carolina, that it was true that these maps were the product of intentional vote dilution tactics. And now as we approach the U.S. Supreme Court, we're confident that the court will also hold that it is true that Black voters have been harmed in South Carolina, and that there needs to be a remediation of that harm so that Black voters can make their ballots and their preferences known under fair electoral maps.
And one of the things that we focus on in this show, we talk about who gets a voice. So part of what this case is doing is talking about who gets a voice and the process of how that voice is decided. So in your view, as a litigator with the Legal Defense Fund, what can you say about the voices of Black voters and why they matter?
Black voters matter because they belong to this country's founding. Black voters have always had to fight for their voices to be heard in a political process that has historically and currently seeks to stifle their participation. And this case is just another example of a historical legacy of discrimination against Black voters in places like South Carolina. And if we want to have a truly multiracial democracy, that means we have to allow every demographic to have political power, and for their voices to be able to be heard and be impactful, and to be treated like every other voter, and to be treated like every other citizen who has the right to cast a ballot, and to really have their voices acknowledged as belonging to our political community and not being marginalized or disenfranchised.
Now, it was also noted in the 2022 election that there was a great reduction, a significant reduction in the number of Black voters that were coming and exercising their right to vote. So do you feel that it's because of some of the things that have happened since Holby, or some of the rules that have been put in place that are making Black voters less likely to vote? And that's another reason why we need to go to the court in this case and make this remedy.
I think we need to remind Black voters that their votes do matter. And I think having a case that unveils discrimination in the electoral process does function as a galvanizing moment to say our voices do matter, which is why there have been concerted efforts to suppress the voices of these people. And I think there has to be an uplifting of the political efficacy of these communities, and a reminder that there would not be the need to gerrymander, there would not be the need to intentionally discriminate if your voices were not actually potent, if your voices were not actually able to create change in your communities.
Well, that is superb that we have so many groups that are standing up for racial justice and standing up for the voices of Black voters. Are there other partners that you want to talk about who have been with the Legal Defense Fund in this fight?
Yes, we've had wonderful partners with the ACLU, the ACLU of South Carolina, the law firm of Arnold & Porter, and so many other partners who have really worked to create belonging and fairness for Black voters in South Carolina.
Well, I want to thank you for these comments. We are really using this time to make sure that South Carolinians understand what's going on in this case, that they're paying attention during the coming few days, and to make sure that they know who to ask for more information. So they can certainly turn to their local NAACP, the state organization, or their chapter to get more information. Legal Defense Fund page, Legal Women Voters, ACLU, will all have a lot of additional information. And so we want this show to pique people's interest, go read the additional material, and get ready to watch, because I'm sure we'll have this on live stream where we'll announce later where people can watch the actual rally that's taking place. And can you tell me a little bit about the rally?
Yes, there are a number of local groups in South Carolina who will be coming up to the Capitol and coming up to the U.S. Supreme Court and really making their voices known, that Black voters matter, that Black South Carolinian voters matter, and that political participation is guaranteed by our U.S. Constitution.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ingram, for being with us today and giving us your time to make sure that everybody understands the case, that we're on board and we're supporting the efforts of LDF in taking this to the Supreme Court. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.